Okay, nearly there. Great. Okay, so we are live on YouTube at the moment, which is great. So I will post that link on social media as well for people who want to join us at the last minute. Lovely. Okay, so because I'm quite conscious that we've got a lot of speakers, there's a lot to go through, and we want to have enough time for questions as well. I think we're going to get started. So welcome everyone. I'm Dimitra Fimi. I'm Professor of Fantasy and Children's Literature here at the University of Glasgow, and I also co-direct our Centre for Fantasy and the Fantastic.
And I'm Mimi, a PhD student funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council in collaboration with the University of Glasgow and the Imperial War Museums. So my research project is called War in Modern Fantasy Writing, and I'm looking at how writers and creatives have expressed the experiences of war and conflict through fantasy, looking especially at the Imperial War Museum's collections.
So we're delighted to welcome you to this evening's event, which will bring us perspectives on fantasy in the midst of war from 5 excellent colleagues, all members of the Center for Fantasy Literature Studies, Taras Shevchenko Institute of Literature, National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine. Some of today's speakers, and I will introduce each one of them individually in a little while. Some of our speakers also joined us online to give research papers at our Once and Future Fantasies conference here in Glasgow in July 2022. Some of you will remember that session. And that was only 5 months after this recent conflict had started. Now, today, 3 years into this war, we will hear from them again and a few more as well. And I can't even begin to imagine what the experience of having been sort of on the ground, so to speak, during this distressing time has been for them. But I'm so very humbled by their dedication to their academic work in a time of conflict. And I know I will learn so much from them today, and all about fantasy in the midst of war.
From the Pevensey children's adventures into Narnia during the evacuation from the Blitz, to the influence of the medieval Wars of the Roses on the Game of Thrones series, the experience of war and conflict has been an integral feature in the fantasy genre since the very beginning. Fantasy can be a tool to express difficult topics or to explore complex histories and how they impact the world today. Unimaginable experiences may suddenly start to make sense in imaginary settings. And with the genre's enduring popularity, fantasy can start conversations with wide audiences about the experiences and history of war. Having said this, the academic intersection of war and the fantastic is still understudied at the minute. So this is why it's such a privilege to hear from our speakers today. What does it mean when writing fantasy and imagining the fantastic during conflicts happening today? How might the fantastic intersect with visual cultures, memes, and discourses taking place during contemporary conflicts?
So we will hear about all of these questions and many, many more actually shortly from our speakers. Let me first take you through a couple of practicalities. And again, those of you that have been in our events before know all of this, so apologies for repeating them. So the structure of the event is as follows. I will be introducing each speaker individually, one by one, and we will hear a brief 10-minute presentation from each of them in turn. You will have seen all the titles and the abstracts on the website. Then our speakers will take questions from all of you, and as many as we can fit at least within the time that we have. Now, for your questions, and that's the important bit, please use the Q&A function. Feel free to use the chat function to register reactions and share thoughts. Obviously the chat has been going on for a while already, but with so many of us online at the moment, it's difficult to monitor both. So for questions, remember that's the difference between the chat and the Q&A. For questions, please use the Q&A to make sure we won't miss your question. We are live at the moment. We are being live streamed on YouTube, so I will also keep an eye on questions from people watching the live stream as well. If you want to live tweet or share any reactions on social media, do tag the center as well so we can see it and share with you later on as well. So without further ado, I'm now going to introduce our first speaker. And as I said, again, in the order as advertised on the website. So our first speaker is Yevgenia Kanchura, who is acting head of the Theoretical and Applied Linguistics Department of Zhytomyr Polytechnic State University. and Deputy Manager of the Center for Fantasy Literature Studies at the Taras Shevchenko Institute of Literature of the National Academy of Sciences, Ukraine. Her PhD from Kiev National Linguistic University was on Terry Pratchett's Discworld novels. She works on postmodern fantasy, folklore, and mythology. And her title for today's presentation is The War Theme in Fantasy Literature, Tradition and Transformation. So, Yevgenia, over to you.
Thank you, Dimitra, and thank you for the presentation, and thank you for allowing us to talk about such an important thing exactly right now. So I'm sharing the screen. I think I need your...
I think I've enabled that now.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Perfect. We can all see it.
Yeah. So I think everything is okay. Yeah.
Yes, perfect.
And thank you. And I'd like to tell you about the war theme in fantasy literature, like traditions and transformations. Fantasy literature has long been shaped by mythological traditions, with war as one of the central narrative elements. Classical or high fantasy, influenced by epic and biblical traditions, presents war as an ultimate battle between good and evil. However, postmodern fantasy challenges these conventions, revising the war motive and redefining the role of the hero. Today, I will explore the transformation, focusing on how postmodern authors, particularly Terry Pratchett, Neil Gaiman, Diana Wynne Jones, Max Frey, Vladislav Krapivin, Andrzej Sapkowski, deconstruct traditional heroic fantasy. Can you see? Well, high fantasy follows a rigid framework in which good and evil are geographically and racially defined. The motive of the last battle is a key element originating from biblical eschatology, mythology, and epic storytelling, for example, like Ragnarok. The structure reinforces binary oppositions where the world's fate depends on the climactic final confrontation. If we just refer to the examples, we can remind that the War of the Rings is a cosmic struggle between light and darkness. The final battle in the Chronicles of Narnia follows an apocalyptic pattern, bringing about a dramatic transformation of the world. And even Harry Potter series, which were written in postmodern era and contain plenty of postmodern features, follows this pattern. The Battle of Hogwarts Hogwarts include archetypal motives such as legendary sword, the hero's self-sacrifice, and a distinct opposition of forces. What did I do? I think I lost my presentation.
Now it's here.
We can still see it. We're just in the same slide as you were before, Evgenia.
Yeah. Can you see the second slide?
Yeah, the second slide we can see, yes.
Yes. And something happened.
There you go.
Sorry. When high fantasy is rooted in heroic epics and presents heroism as a courage without hope for victory. And these narratives, heroism is absolute, requiring self-sacrifice. Additionally, biblical tradition introduces the theme of mercy and compassion, for the sinner. We can regard these like an examples in each of the three books and series which I mentioned before. For example, the mercy for Gollum in The Lord of the Rings, and mercy for the traitor in Chronicles of Narnia, and mercy and even a sort of compassion for Draco Malfoy. Unlike, in fantasy worlds where good and evil are localized, war is a predominant element of the plot, a necessary resolution. It is often dictated by prophecy, serving or as a cohesive narrative, an indisputable triumph embedded in the world building itself. I would like to highlight that good is represented by heroes, which are strictly defined by the archetypal roles, and evil has a bit of element of mercy and forgiveness. So there is some psychological struggle, there is some psychological aspects, but at the same time there is a binary world with good and evil. And final battle is just a logical resolution of this. Unlike classical fantasy, postmodern fantasy rejects rigid binaries and challenges the cohesive nature of war-driven storytelling. By placing good and evil within every person's soul, postmodern fantasy shifts the focus to personal choice and responsibility. In a world of moral relativism, emerging during the Cold War period, as a reflection on it, postmodern fantasy embraces the philosophy of dialogue in which the stranger is regarded as the other. It questions the ultimate truth of the grand narratives and liberating both characters and readers from narrative determinism and introducing the new ethics with an emphasis on awareness and acceptance of the shadow. And these ideas manifest in the following ways. First of all, it is deconstruction of binary thinking, then the review of and revision of the hero archetype, and finally, it is a questioning of cohesive narrative. As for deconstruction of binary thinking, moral ambiguity replaces absolute alignment. Evil is no longer an external force, but an internal and societal issue. Examples include traditional evil species such orcs, trolls, and goblins portrayed differently in Discworld by Terry Pratchett or in The Witcher by Andrzej Sapkowski. Another example is a partnership of a demon and angel in Good Omens, Gaiman and Pratchett. Yeah, in Power of Three by Diana Wynne Jones, or in The Orange Portrait with Specs by Vladislav Krapivin. A lifelong war between two nations is resolved when teenagers recognize their common humanity and the failings of their elders. The new hero can be regarded as a sort of a trickster. The traditional epic hero is replaced by figures who rely on pragmatism, wit, or negotiation rather than brute force. Examples include characters from Thief of the Time Pratchett, you can see the illustration here, and My Ragnarok by Max Frey, and also plenty of Max Frey short novels and short stories. This aligns fantasy with science fiction, where such paradigm-breaking problem solvers are most common. I would like to highlight that point. It's a sort of combination of hero from high fantasy and epic archetype with a brand new science fiction sort of hero. And questioning all cohesive narratives. Postmodern fantasy critiques not only prophecy and the necessity of final battles, but also rumors, propaganda, and psychological manipulation. In Good Omens, prophecy is no longer an unchangeable fate. but something to be subverted. In this world, war is often avoidable, with conflicts arising from misunderstandings, manipulation, or power struggles. The brilliant example of such understanding of war is Thought by Terry Pratchett, which explores racial prejudice that fuel the war. I would like to draw your attention to the direct quote from Thought. "I need no eggs to be a dwarf," said Blushfulson, "nor do I need to hate trolls. What kind of creature defines itself by hatred?" And we return to the scheme, which is now a bit different. The two phases of war in postmodern fantasy. Rather than treating war as a necessary clash between good and evil, postmodern fantasy explores it as a social construct, an ethical dilemma, or even a crime. War as a crime, initiated by profit, ideological control, or coercion, is seen as an ethical failure. Brilliant examples were provided by Terry Pratchett in his Jingo, Thought, and Monsters Regiment. Such wars are depicted as artificially created conflicts that should be prevented, averted, or avoided. And any kind of books written in postmodern fantasy, they also demonstrate a war which is a necessity, a war like a self-defense, when you have to fight and protect your land. And here comes the new characters. The characters who protect their land, they rely on wit and trickery as well, along with a weapon, rather than brute force, embodying the traits of the new hero. Also, what is really very important, that final battle is now regarded not as a sacred element of the story. If it is drawn by the prophecy, it's a sort of coercive narrative, and so it can be regarded as a crime. And if it is to destroy if the war was caused as an attempt to destroy the world, so it's the invention, and that is self-defense. There are two different types, at least two, of the final battle. I would like also to demonstrate this brilliant example from Terry Pratchett Carpe Jugulum. By revising and resisting coercive narrative, postmodern fantasy emphasizes personal choice grounded in ethics. The nature of sin is defined as treating people like things. Look at the words said by Granny Weatherworks. Reinforcing the right of fight against invaders. Yeah, really best quote ever. I agree with you. Fight against invaders and protect your land and personal freedom. And we actually come to the conclusion that transition from classical to postmodern fantasy marks a significant shift in the portrayal of the war. While high fantasy uploads binaries and divine destiny, postmodern fantasy dismantles these struggles, emphasizing personal choice, ethical complexity, and alternative resolution to conflict. Understanding this transformation helps us recognize how fantasy literature reflects broader cultural and philosophical changes in our perception of war and morality. Ultimately, no war can be justified unless it is a fight to protect yourself, your home, and your land. And I think I'm privileged to complete my presentation with another quote from Terry Pratchett, the words of Tiffany Aching, who protects her land with a frying pan in her hand, and who reminds me actually our ladies who were protecting their city with a can of tomatoes. Thank you for the attention.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Evgenia. That was great. Really, really lovely opening to this series of presentations. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move swiftly to the next speaker because I said we're pressed for time here. So our next speaker is Alexandra Filonenko, who has a PhD in theory of literature from Mohila Black Sea National University at Mykolaiv, Ukraine, where she also held the position of senior lecturer in English philology, in the English philology department before the war in Ukraine. From August to December 22, she was a research fellow at Saarland University, and currently she's a visiting scholar at Friedrich Schiller University at Jena. And her topic today is You Shall Not Pass, Tolkienian Social Media Discourse of the Russian-Ukrainian War, an Overview. Over to you, Alexandra.
Thank you so much. I must warn people that I'm going to talk very fast because I have a lot of stuff to talk about. Okay, in this talk, I will give a brief overview of Tolkienian references in media and political discourse on the Russian-Ukrainian war. Since the full-scale invasion on February 24, these references have been widely used to describe this catastrophe, comparing the invaders to orcs, Russia to Mordor, Putin to Sauron, etc. Yet this tradition has a long history beginning with the Cold War. Certain tendencies are rooted in historical and geographical realities of the two countries and the peculiarities of Russian Tolkienian fandom. I will only sketch these developments, as a 10-minute talk will not allow me to go into particulars, although there is a wealth of material coming from both sides of the conflict. So hope my slides move. Okay, in his introduction to the 1961 Swedish translation of The Lord of the Rings, Ake Olmarks suggested correspondences between Sauron and Stalin and between Mordor and Russia. Tolkien was not happy with this comparison, and C.S. Lewis backed him up. Nevertheless, the comparison stuck in the Western collective imagination, though lay dormant for a while after the end of the Cold War. Yet it would pop up from time to time, like on this map of prejudices created by Bulgarian-born artist Janko Cvetko, where you can see the word Mordor instead of Moscow. And when the full-scale invasion of Ukraine began, the most prominent Tolkien references on social media and other media became use of the word orcs to refer to the Russian occupiers. It became so commonplace that you can even find an entry in Wikipedia that says, quote, "Since the beginning of the Russo-Ukrainian war in 2014, Ukrainians have used the term as a pejorative for Russian forces. During the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022, Ukrainians began to massively use the term orcs in relation to Russian military personnel and their war crimes. Al Jazeera English and Politica included the term as an example of the new language of war in Ukraine," end of quote. Why orcs? Beside the long tradition of comparing the USSR Russia with Mordor, the current war has revealed some other commonalities that can be considered orcish. The atrocities of Russian occupying forces, of which the world is now well aware. Nightly bombardment of the cities. It is remarkable that invasion began in the darkest nights of February, and the most terrible nights that we had to live through were the darkest. There must be a military reason for this, but we know that orcs are afraid of even moonlight. Cruelty and contempt towards each other on a level that seems unprecedented is quite common among Russian occupying forces. And there is also a racial element, unfortunately. Not all Russian nationals are ethnic Slavs. There are such groups as the Chechens, who resemble Middle Eastern people, and the Burats, the Mongoloid type people, and others who behave in a particularly ruthless manner. The Bucha tragedy is largely blamed on the Burats. Defilement of land. It is difficult to overestimate the damage of ecosystems caused by intensive fighting, the burning of entire forest, and the breach of the Kakhovka Dam. I'll give just one example. In 2022 alone, more than 2,500 dolphins were found dead on the beaches of the Odessa region. It happened because of the electromagnetic emission produced by the Russian submarines and warships. Ukraine didn't really have a fleet. Specialists say that only 5% of the dead animals wash up on the shores, which makes the number of dead Black Sea dolphins a frightening 50,000. But this comparison with orcs began before the current phase of the war. It intensified during the Maidan and the war in Donbass in 2014. It has never really stopped since. In 2015, for example, Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko used the word Mordor to refer to Putin's concept of New Russia. In 2016, Google Translator was hacked to yield Mordor when translating the word Russia. I checked it myself in the time, and it really was the case for several days. It was also around this time that the first maps appeared showing Ukraine as Gondor or the Shire and Russia as Mordor. The culmination of this cartographic endeavor was achieved in this particular map, created at the end of summer of 2022. I could give an entire lecture on this map alone. It meticulously combines the geography, history, and current events of our primary world with Tolkien's secondary world. For example, geographically and historically, Ukraine has been divided into so-called right bank Ukraine and left bank Ukraine by our own undoing, the river Dnipro, which with all the ensuing consequences of Russia Mordor bordering the left bank Ukraine. During the current war, our undoing has proven to be a reliable border, with almost all the fighting taking place on the left bank of the river. Poland became our Rohan, especially in the first year of the war, and the Czech Republic is our Khazad-Dum, supplying weapons and repairing damaged military equipment, while Belarus turned out to be Isengard, with Lukashenko constantly being compared to Saruman, and so on, so forth. I can talk forever about this map. The term orcs was also used in official political discourse from the very beginning of the invasion. One of the first officials to use it in the public speeches was Vitaly Kim, the governor of the Mykolaiv region, the region I come from. Here you can see the translation of the first post on Telegram in which he mentions orcs. It happened on February 28. His famous "orcs are coming" became a sort of rallying cry during the first weeks of the full-scale invasion. The use of the word orcs to describe Russian invading troops and other references to Tolkien quickly spread in political discourse and public speeches, not only in Ukraine, but also abroad. Here you can see several posts on different social media platforms, from the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, Council of Elrond, from an American political figure, Paul Massaro, the meme in the middle, very interesting with the flags. It also quite complex thing to talk about, and from Lithuanian journalist Andrius Tapinas, it's about Orcrist. This did not go unnoticed by Western media as well. Here are just several examples. Most journalists understood the reason for such references and agreed with their legitimacy in the current circumstances. But there is also the Russian side of the Tolkienian war discourse. And it is quite complex and might even seem surprising if you're not familiar with the Russian socio-historical background and the peculiarities of Tolkien fandom. Here you can see the map found in the Russian section of the internet, the so-called Runet, and it represents their self-perception. According to it, the European part of Russia, and especially Moscow, is Gondor, and the Asian part of Siberia is Mordor. This is deeply rooted in the historical, social, and racial realities of this country. The ironic self-perception of Russians as orcs is reflected in the art of Moscow-based artist Tony Sart. The willingness of some Russians to accept the identity of the orcs is partly due to specific developments in Russian fandom's perception of Tolkien's text. There are two important fan-fiction novels. The Black Book of Arda, Черная книга Арды, has cult status and has gone through 5 or more editions. The book's authors are Natalia Vasilyeva and Natalia Nekrasova. The book describes the events of the Silmarillion from the point of view of the dark forces. The authors state that it is an attempt to throw off Tolkien's dogma, to challenge the clear division into right and wrong, into good and evil, to restore the way of thinking and the reasons of the deeds of evil, to show the acts and hopes of the enemies. The second book is The Last Ring Bearer by Kirill Yeskov. It's a rewriting of Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. It follows a group of elves led by Gandalf who wage an unceasing war against the peaceful realm of Sauron. Eventually, Sauron succeeds in defeating them, destroying their treacherous magic and ushering a new age of progress and prosperity. These two texts form the basis of the so-called professor was not right attitude, which turns Tolkien's ethics on their head. According to this credo, orcs are not monsters, but the victims, which makes them easier to identify with. Continuing in this vein, a notorious personality and popular Russian film actor Ivan Okhlobystin, who unwaveringly supports the war, published a kind of manifesto, Orcs' Angry Truth, explaining why Russians accept the orc identity and how it is the West's fault that they were driven to such a state. Quote, orcs in game world are green, toothy, fearless monsters born by the earth and see no other purpose than an endless bloody battle. Perhaps our enemies have a point. We really haven't seen anything else. We just haven't had the chance. Perhaps things could have been different if the world had been kinder to us. Most importantly, we have sincerely tried not to be what they thought we were. End of quote. Here he mixes Tolkien orcs with the orcs from the Warcraft games, reducing their evil nature and emphasizing their specific courage and sheer love of combat. And on September 30, 2022, Okhlobystin also appeared at a concert dedicated to accession of new territories. He gave a fiery speech in which he described the war in Ukraine as a holy war. He also proposed the reintroduction of the old Russian word goida, a call to violence meaning blood kill attack. This goida itself became a meme. Almost immediately, the Russian rock band Nogus Velo, who strongly opposed the war, responded to this performance by including a monstrous version of Okhlobystin and his war cry Goida in the new video clip for the song Anthem of the Doomed, Goida Orcs. Among Russians who do not support the war, attitudes to Tolkien references vary, but some public figures and journalists actively use the word orcs to describe their compatriots who have become occupiers, murder for Putin's Russia, and compare Putin to Sauron. If I still have some seconds, I can show some memes. So this is how it goes in the meme culture. And kind of like Putin is normally compared to Sauron, and this is kind of like very kind of like relates to the contemporary moment, and there is a new development in this Gulf of Numenor instead of Gulf of Mexico. And then this is very funny. Lukashenko is surely our Saruman, and yeah, you recognize the guy, and he acts as the mouth of Sauron. And this must be very interesting for the British people. Here you see Mordor territory. It's kind of like a new part of this. And also very funny memes about the help, which came sometimes not really on time. And the last slide, it's very funny because Putin got tired of being the Hitler of the 21st century and decided to play Lord of the Ring. Actually, he gave as a present to the leaders, the presidents of 8 other countries which belong to this kind of their commonwealth, the rings. And one of the rings he left for himself. It was quite an outrageous event. Even some Western newspapers published some material on that. So this is my talk. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. It was fascinating, absolutely fascinating. I know we're going to try and make some of those slides from today available after the event as well. So hopefully people will get more of a chance to have a look at in detail to all of the material you've put together. Lovely, thank you. Okay, and I'm swiftly moving to our third speaker. The third speaker is Tatiana Ryazancheva, who is a leading research fellow at the Department of Comparative Literature at Shevchenko Institute of Literature in Ukraine, and head also of the Center for Fantasy Literature Studies. Her work has included books on metaphysical poetry, and the one that caught my attention was that article that talks about the presence of metaphysical poetry in Diana Wynne Jones' Howl's Moving Castle. But today she'll be talking to us about We Keep Holding On to Life, Elements of Magical Thinking and Folklore Imagery in Inahonsha and Yurki Kustishin's photopoetic project, hashtag 4.5.0. So I'm going to share the slides. And Tatiana, you tell me when you want me to change them.
Yeah, thank you. So here we go. Thank you very much for letting me in. And it's an honor and privilege to be here tonight. So my topic is not directly related maybe to fantasy literature, but it deals with the things which are closely related to that. This is magical thinking and folklore imagery. So you can see the topic of my presentation on your screens now. We keep holding on to life, magical thinking and folklore imagery in Inna Honchar and Yurka Kostyshin Photopoetic Project. Hashtag 4.5.0. So Ukrainian poetry created during the struggles for national independence in the early 20th and 23rd centuries interprets war as both a deeply personal experience and an integral part of national history. It reflects a profound connection to the homeland and its people through symbolic return to fundamental values. This is achieved by reviving elements of mythological worldview and magical thinking, incorporating folklore and mythological imagery and imitating forms of traditional folk narratives. Next, please. Next slide, please, Dimitra. Thank you. This creative strategy defines Ukrainian poetry written during the onset of the full-scale Russian invasion in February 2022 and is now evolving further through intermediate forms such as photo poetry. You can see now the definition of photo poetry I use in my talk on your screens. So next, please. Thank you. The art book 4.5.0 published in Kharkiv in 223 present a collaborative project by poet Inna Honchar and photographer Yurka Kostyshin. It features approximately 40 short poems, each one paired with a photograph to form intermediate compositions where the verbal and visual elements are equally integral to the narrative. The book unfolds as a sequence of photo poems unified by its title, which encapsulates the central theme, and by recurrent imagery. Next one, please. So how does it all work? The title of the book, as you know already, is 4.5.0. It's the Ukrainian military slang for "we are all right, we are alive." This idea, repeated in various forms throughout the book, embodies an element of magical thinking. We are alive, we are all right becomes a mantra that, according to Cambridge Dictionary, I quote, is a word or sound that is believed to have a special spiritual power, a word or phrase that is often repeated and expresses a particular strong belief, end of quote. In the context of this book, it serves as a kind of a spell, a means of altering the course of events and transforming the reality for the better. The photographs are semantically connected to the text, representing and enhancing the central imagery of the poems. The natural elements in these images take on metaphorical meaning linked to folklore and mythological symbolism. As a whole, this photopoetic imagery symbolizes the resacralization of everyday life during wartime, when each day becomes an ordeal, a battle between good and evil, life and death. So what do we see on these photographs? Next, please. So first of all, we have the elements, water, fire, and earth. Sometimes they appear in combinations, like here, reflecting fundamental oppositions such as light and darkness, life and death. In this particular example, the image of burning coals in the darkness is paired with a poem titled Casting a Spell, which emphasizes the resilience of life. The poem interprets traditional crafts such as forging and weaving as activities associated with both magic and war. I quote the final lines in my interlinear translation. Father is forging swords, mother is weaving, casting a spell. End of quote. Next, please. Thank you. Liminal spaces or images associated with a transition, passage, and change, like skylines, windows, doors, stairs, and various opening, in this project emphasize movement towards light. These can be interpreted as metaphor for passage or ordeal. Here, in this particular example, we can see a combination of an opening and a skyline in a setting sun. The viewer's gaze is directed towards light, from darkness to light. Next, please. Also, there are plenty of plants in these books. In this book, plants and their components like flowers, stems, roots, branches, and seeds symbolize renewal, transformation, and connection to the earth. Next one, please. Next one, please. Thank you. Notably, the plants are always depicted standing upright, even when burned. This is a striking image of resilience. I quote from the poem on the screen, "I will live as a black corn, as a burned sunflower." So in the poems, plants are often associated with we, like in this example, seeds from which we grow as the sprouts of life, or in the other poem, "and we are the seeds and the roots are growing from us," end of quote. The plants serve as a metaphor for us, symbolizing that we are alive, we are indestructible and intrinsically connected to this land. It's a part of us, just as we are part of it. Next, please. Thank you. Among the most prominent recurring images are grains and spikes of wheat and rye, the crops used to make bread. In Ukrainian, the word chlib, bread, refers both to grain and to baked bread. In Ukrainian culture, bread is a powerful symbol of life and prosperity, but it is also associated with death and suffering through the memory of Holodomor, the genocidal famine of 1932-1933, initiated and orchestrated by Stalinist Soviet regime. The photo poem Hata, Hat, exemplifies many of the traits just described in my presentation. Next, please. That's it. So in its visual aspect, clearly establishes the old hut as a liminal space. The black and white photograph of the hut's interior captures the central image of the poem, but draws the viewer's attention to the window, through which distant trees are visible. The gaze is again directed outward, moving from darkness to light. And as we observe, there are no living beings inside. So now, next, please. So now you can read the poem on the screen, again in my interlinear translation, while I proceed with my explanation. So the text is a dramatic monologue addressed to an old hut as if it were a living being, or more precisely, as if it were an old woman, because chata in Ukrainian is feminine. The poem recreates the style of Ukrainian folk spells, incorporating typical features such as a personal address, the vocative form in Ukrainian, chato stara, old hut, you old hut. There is a rhythmic enumeration, children, boats, eyes, magical triplication, 9 bows, indirect naming, where gas serves as a euphemism for enemy, and the closing formula of prohibition, go away. You are not allowed to touch those who are alive and warm. So ultimately, this is a protective spell against an unnamed but clearly very malevolent force. The poem also features a dynamic metaphor rooted in a recognizable folklore imagery where death is depicted as a voyage, with the boat serving as a euphemism for a coffin. The image of the black bread and children's eyes, or more precisely in their gaze, symbolizes their death of famine, which in the Ukrainian context again alludes to the Holodomor of 1932-1933. Nevertheless, the photo poem asserts that the old heart, though still bearing the weight of tragic memories, has managed to wade across the darkness and survive. It belongs to the land of the living and remains a space of life, even though it's no longer a place of safety. The enemy is too close. This home is under threat, and the author invokes the strongest magic at her disposal to protect it. In the context of this book, the image of the home that has survived becomes part of the complex metaphor for Ukraine as the land of the living, our homeland, our motherland, inseparable from us. It represents our motherland, which we are ready to defend by all means, even through magic. Next, please. So finally, my conclusion. Building on elements of mythological worldview, folk narratives, and magical thinking, while incorporating folklore and mythological imagery into a new intermediate format, photo poetry. This project celebrates the significance and resilience of life, emphasizing its indestructibility and ultimate triumph over death. As Inna Honchar notes in her preface to this book, I quote, "Even amid the cataclysm of war, which spreads entropy through time and space, we keep holding on to life." End of quote. And thank you very much for your attention.
Oh, wow. Thank you so very much. I'm going to try to stop sharing now so I can see everyone again. Thank you so much. This was very, very moving, Tatiana. Thank you. I found that profoundly, impactful. Thank you so much. Great. Okay, so again, swiftly moving on to our fourth speaker, and that's Gana Kolesnik, who is Associate Professor of the English Philology Department, Petro-Mohila Black Sea National University at Mykolaiv, Ukraine, and Visiting Research Fellow at the University of Roehampton in London. Her research interests include themes of history, reinterpretations, cultural memory, and traumatic experiences, and their representations in contemporary British and American young adult fantasy fiction. She also works with fairy tales and all sorts of really, really fascinating things. So the topic today is the womanly face of war, mythological imagery in artistic representations of Ukraine on social media. Gana, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction. Just a moment, I will share my screen with you.
Sure.
I hope it is visible now.
Yes, that's good.
Okay, so today I'm going to talk about the womanly face of war. That is mythological imagery in artistic representation of Ukraine on social media. The war in Ukraine is highly visualized, and the images have turned into a powerful means of shaping public reception. Social media, with their orientation to visual impact, offer a perfect territory for the visual coverage of the events and become an effective vehicle for sharing personal war experiences and emotional responses to the traumatic events connected with the war. These responses may take different forms, and one of them is the creation of artworks. A great example of such a response is the emergence of multiple artistic representations of Ukraine, which flooded the Ukrainian segment of social media since the beginning of the war. Current personifications of Ukraine as a woman put to active use mythological imagery and return to the roots of the country's national identity. Anthropomorphic personifications of the state as a human being became really popular in European countries at the beginning of the 19th century with the rise of national movements. The connection between the land and the woman is archetypical and is present in most cultures since prehistoric times. The land as a mother goddess. So generally states were personified in a female body. Some early personifications in the Western world tended to be national manifestations of war goddess Minerva and often took the Latin name of the ancient Roman province, like Britannia. In Ukrainian culture, there exists a long tradition of personifying Ukraine as a young woman dressed in a traditional clothes. This tradition dates back to the beginning of Ukrainian selfhood or statehood when Ukraine was a part of the Russian Empire. For instance, the images of Ukrainian girls were really popular among Russian painters of the 19th century. The girls in these portraits look extremely fragile, vulnerable, and feminine, and of course the desire to protect. So they obviously translate the dominating narrative of the Russian Empire, which saw Ukraine as the territory which could not protect itself and needed help. Still, not only Russians perceived Ukraine as a female. The Ukrainian nationalists were actively exploiting this image at the beginning of the 20th century as well. An example of this tragedy is this postcard printed in 1922 in Austria and called Ukraine's Golgotha. It depicts Ukraine as a young woman tied to the cross with a burning village in the background. When the war started, social media got flooded with female personifications of Ukraine. Very likely, Putin himself gave an extra push to the topic. When speaking about the Minsk agreements right before the beginning of the war, he made a clear reference to Ukraine as a woman by saying, "Like it or not, my beauty, you have to put up with it." It is necessary to add that in Russian, this phrase has a clear reference to a sexual assault. This absolutely horrible sexist phrase metaphorized Ukraine as a submissive, desired female, and as a result, triggered a completely new discourse. One representative pair of images created by Andrei Yermolenko uses the contrast between Ukraine in 2014 and 2022. In the first picture, Ukraine is depicted as a helpless teenage girl. In contrast to it, the second one shows Ukraine as a young, beautiful woman capable of protecting her freedom and dignity with weapons. Though numerous personifications of Ukraine on social media vary greatly, they can be divided into several big groups according to the traditional mythological and cultural images they refer to. One of these groups is related to the image of Berehinia, which is widely used to represent woman as wife, hostess, mother, as well as keeper of the traditional family values and the preserver of the collective memory. Though this image looks quite ancient, in fact, it is an example of fake lore or invented tradition. The creation of this myth dates back to late 80s and early 90s of the 20th century. The potential need for new Ukrainian mythology arose during the perestroika period when the canon of femininity formed by communist ideology, the Soviet superwoman, was discredited. The Ukrainian state leaders turned to the symbols of femininity and motherhood and made the matriarchy myth an integral part of the Ukrainian national mythology, moving the image of Berehinia to the spheres of politics and social life. One of the main reasons why Berehinia myth became a part of Ukrainian cultural discourse so quickly lies in a long tradition of veneration the Virgin Mary in Ukraine. The image of Berehinia symbolizing motherhood got mixed with the image of the Virgin Mary, and the result has found its reflection in the popular war imagery. Multiple images represent Ukraine as a suffering mother with a child in her hands and employ meteorological discourse in relation to it. However, there are authors who refuse to follow this model while preserving all features of Berehinia myth, change its modality, preserving Ukraine as an active defender of her children and home rather than a helpless mother grieving over their doleful fates. The double perception of Ukraine as a mother and the warrior is vividly presented in the modern orans created by Diana Vitkovska. The image combines two traditional positions of the Virgin Mary in iconography, most popular in Ukrainian Orthodox Church, referring to the double nature of Ukrainian femininity during the wartime. As the basis for this work, the author takes the most famous Persian orans in Ukraine, the 6-meter high mosaics located in the St. Sophia Cathedral in Kiev. There are also cases when the image of Berehinia is mixed with other cultural icons to reach a peculiar result. In this picture, Berehinia by Larissa Shusko, Ukraine is portrayed as a young girl sitting in the middle of the shelter. The most remarkable thing about the girl is her pose, which copies the pose of Kazakh Mamai, a popular folk character, warrior character. He is considered a male personification of the national character and depicted in a standard pose with a number of fixed details. Though in this case, the artist doesn't follow the tradition in everything, the image is still recognizable. The second important group of images makes a reference to Marana, a goddess of death and revenge in Slavic mythology. The first mentioning of Marana dates back to 1460. Still, in the source, she is described as the goddess of harvest, not of death. Only in 1719, Abraham Frenzel referred to Marana as the goddess of death for the first time. This idea seemed extremely attractive to Slavic folklorists of the end of the 18th, the beginning of the 19th century. The image of Marana as a goddess of death became truly popular with the development of Slavic neo-paganism. Quite often the goddess is seen as a Slavic equivalent of Kali and depicted with 6 hands. In such a way, Marana has been turned into an artificial myth related more to the world of fantasy than the world of history. However, this image is widely popular in contemporary mass culture, and multiple personifications of Ukraine with excessive use of Marana's attributes prove it in a vivid way. The composition in this picture by Alina Antonova resembles paintings with the Virgin Mary descending from the sky. The warrior maid is dressed in a combination of traditional and military clothes. At her feet there is a heap of human skulls lying on the ground. This image is highly representative as it combines Christian motifs, Virgin Mary, as well as neo-pagan ones, Marana. Although the style of Alexei Chorny's work is completely different, he also combines references to important cultural myths in one striking image. Ukraine has got several pairs of hands as a neo-pagan Marana or Indian Kali. Over her head, there is a fiery halo, which may belong to two traditions as well, Christian and Hinduism. In the two front hands, she holds a machine gun. One more pair holds two blooded sabers, thus referring to the Cossack past. And one hand she uses to cradle a baby. The picture demonstrates an attempt to create a new mythological image of Ukraine by appealing to different aspects of its past. Female representations of Ukraine published on social media, mostly Facebook and Pinterest, have become powerful carriers of meanings and turned into an ideological weapon used to influence the people's perception of the war and modifying it. These images share a number of characteristic features employing gendered assumptions and manifesting general tendencies which exist in Ukrainian society and, as a result, become vivid illustrations of the dominant ideological narrative. Though all images depict Ukraine as a strikingly beautiful maiden or a young woman, only few of them are openly sexual. Much more often, they represent Ukraine as an independent actor capable of protecting not only herself but also her children. Notwithstanding the category, personifications of Ukraine are always dressed in a traditional Ukrainian embroidered outfit, though in some cases with elements of contemporary military ammunition. Moreover, a number of these representations fall back on fantasy fan art and computer games design, employing widely spread elements and heroic imagery of popular visual culture. To sum up, wide use of female personifications of Ukraine on mass media is a highly remarkable phenomenon showing active artistic reaction to the event of the war and aimed at the consolidation of the nation through recontextualizing Ukrainian heroic. Thank you very much for your attention.
Wow, thank you so much, Gana. I think there's a lot of admiration for the amazing images you've shown us today. And I know, I can already see lots of synergies between the presentations today, which is really lovely. I know we're going to have a great discussion. Okay, and we're going to move now to our last speaker. And I think we're doing actually fine with time, despite sort of a little bit of time lost here and there. Okay, so our last speaker is Olena Tikhomirova, who is associate professor at Kiev National Linguistic University. Her thesis was on J.R.R. Tolkien, and her research interests include fantasy fiction, metafiction, stylistics, narrative theory, humor, food and drink studies. She teaches English through fiction at university, takes part in various book clubs and reading groups, and more importantly for today, writes stories under the pen name Linda Lothill. You will have all had access to a new short story by Linda Lothill via our website. I'm actually going to just put the link there again as a reminder for you. And that's also the focus of Olena's talk today, The Fairy Librarian, Combining War and Fantasy and Fiction. Olena, over to you. I know there's no presentation for this one. We've got the author herself here talking about her work.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dimitra. Great. No slides, as you'll have to look at me for a while. So this is the story. Last semester, I taught creative writing course. And during our discussions with students, my own story was born. And this is how it happened. So we discussed obviously all aspects of writing a story, but two aspects in particular. The first one is sources. So students complained, I have no ideas, where do I get them, how do I get inspired? So I suggested doing several things, among them, go to a local library or a bookstore and pick a random book and see where it takes you. That was one of the tips. Another one, well, have a tarot reading from someone and metaphorical cards reading. And then I saw in their like blank expressions that I need a more hands-on approach. So I did it myself. I did that. I just went into a local library and I asked them for some books on tarot. And I also had several people doing tarot readings for me, specifically looking for ideas in the story. So if you read my story, the beginning with a visit to the library, that was exactly how it happened, until the magic moment, obviously. So as I was doing this, I felt like I now have to write the full story, which I did. And One thing in our discussions with students struck me. They were very unwilling, for some reason, to set their stories, whether realistic or fantasy or fantastic, in Ukraine. They would write stories set in Seattle. And I would ask, have you been to Seattle? No, but how can I write about Ukraine? So I had an issue with this, right? So I thought, okay, right, of course, I'll write about Ukraine. And this opened these big questions for me. So Ukraine, okay, and where exactly and when? I didn't have to set it in like during the current war. I could write it pre-war. I could write it 20 years ago, but I felt that I couldn't. I felt that I couldn't avoid this. I had to set it right here and now. So I set it exactly as I was writing it in September 2024. And another thing, I knew it had to be a fantasy story because I've been studying fantasy academically for years and years, talking about it on panels. And I thought, okay, here's the moment. And then new questions open up, something that we've heard today from Evgenia, for example, classical conflict, classical hero. I tend to call this the Grail hero. So the Grail hero has to submit to higher powers. They have to admit they exist. That's why they have to demonstrate their humility, their readiness to sacrifice, mercy, compassion. Why? Because it is going to be rewarded. And this is the premise of the world, the metaphysical premise. While an alternative type of hero, this trickster type, right? They know they've got only themselves and their land, their people to rely on. There is no higher power who is going to reward them, say, oh, you've been such a good boy or hobbit, you did not kill Gollum, right? So this is definitely what I wanted to do in this context. And then looking at the legacy of all of the authors, perhaps the most important one for me as inspiration was Terry Pratchett, has always been, because this is the thing that he does in his books. He looks and makes his characters look at their own ways of thinking, at their own cognitive biases, prejudices, and then on a larger scale, how narratives work, right? Coercive narrative, we've heard about how metaphors work, the danger of metaphors ultimately. So metaphor can be a weapon, but it can also be misleading and it can be a trap. So this is what I was trying to achieve. It's only a short story, so obviously my protagonist was not going to take on the Dark Lord or whoever, but just to solve a minor problem on a level available to her, which meant going into a magic place. It's a magic forest in which there exists a metaphor grove. So it's a place where metaphors take on some kind of reality, and it creates a playground in which you can identify them. One of the most important things we know, cognitive biases. Can we actually identify them in ourselves? Can we change our ways of thinking? Can we see that we have been victim to fake news, to ideology, to narrative? How do we identify them? So for me, magic is the place where we can visualize the process of working with your own mind. So this is what my protagonist does. She goes into this grove, and there she has to fight, let's say, a metaphor, right? I really like that idea of fighting metaphor by realizing what this metaphor is. It is a classic story of breaking the curse. So this girl is on the quest of breaking a curse put on this fairy librarian, and this is something I brainstorm with my students. When I realized then that I'm going to write a story of breaking of a curse, obviously immediately some cliches and tropes appeared in my mind, and I thought, okay, no true love first kiss or whatever, nothing like this, please, can we do it in a different way? And we brainstormed it with my students. Okay, we need to break a curse, guys, help me, what can we do in a fantasy setting, right? While we did that, we realized, and this is once again about the way we think about things, then to break this curse, we need to realize where it's coming from. We need to learn its history. We need to go deeper. We need to understand what underlies this curse, how it came into being, and so on. And of course, this magic forest is a perfect place to find about these histories, because there's the magic librarian, other magic creatures who are willing to talk. They're very talkative. You ask them a question, so how this came into being? Oh, let me tell you a story. And they do. So this is, in a nutshell, what the story was about. And we share it today because I wrote it in English. This course that I teach, it's in English. Discussions we had with students, they were in English and so. But of course, fantasy authors in Ukraine have written and are writing stories combining the current war with fantasy motifs. They are in Ukrainian, but hopefully they will be translated into English, published, and we'll be able to talk about this, on a larger scale. Now it's what we've got at the moment. So I think this is what I wanted to say, and I would really love to hear, especially if you have read the story, your feedback on that.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Elena. That was great. I did love the story. I've probably seen it before everybody else. Very privileged. I have lots of questions, but let's see. Okay, so this was all our speakers. We have about 20 minutes for questions, which is brilliant. I'm really pleased with how we've done time-wise. So thanks to all the speakers for being so good with their timekeeping. So we've got some questions already that are coming up on the. I just wanted to, before, if that's all right, I want to use sort of my chair's prerogative here, and I think one theme that I saw coming up again and again in all the presentations had to do exactly with what Elena was talking about at the end, right, with metaphor and with fantasy as a way of thinking differently, as a way of doing things differently, as a way of representing things differently, potentially. So can I just ask each of you just very briefly to give us a response to this idea of how do you see, the work that you've been doing? How is the metaphor work? How is fantasy working as a metaphor at the moment that you're working right now, but also with the texts that you're working right now? We had when we launched the center, Ellen Kushner, one of our main sort of guest speaker at the time, said that fantasy literalizes the metaphor, makes the metaphor come to life. So yeah, I'd like to see your responses in that and how that might be operating in these times, that you're all working and people are writing. Who'd like to go first? Shall we go in turn? Yevgenia, do you want to have a go first?
Yeah, thank you very much for touching the topic of metaphor, and that is absolutely natural after Lena's talk, brilliant talk. Actually, in my opinion, fantasy is a way how to reflect the world using metaphor thinking. And one of my colleagues once said that people who do not understand fantasy like a serious genre, they just are metaphor deaf. They cannot understand the meaning of metaphors, or feel, it's better to say, because it also refers to our feelings. And referring to Pratchett, our dearest author, he once said that this quote is a world where all the metaphors are potentially real. And in our situation, we really use metaphors here, there, and now. because we do have to reflect. We are living our lives, and we really have to explain to ourselves every minute which we are living. And we really started to think realistically on the one hand and metaphorically on the other. And every single minute might become a metaphor. For example, one of the first days, my neighbor knocked at my door, and I was living alone. My husband was in another place, and my son was serving in the army. She brought me a cake because the shops were selling out or even giving out the cakes which were close to close to date.
Expiry date.
Expiring date. And she got two. She brought one to me. I cut it into half and brought to other neighbor. And my friend from United States tapped me. "What are you doing? How are you feeling?" Said, "Oh, it's okay. I'm sitting under the shell and eating a cake." And isn't it a metaphor of our living? That is how we live and how we use metaphors every single day.
That's lovely. Thank you. Thank you so much. Who would like to come into this? Alexandra?
Yeah, probably this question of metaphors is very important in connection to my talk, because very often I heard and read about that Ukrainians dehumanize Russians by calling them orcs, and it's not nice, it's not good. But here again, it's not like, well, it's not like real, it's a metaphorical usage. I hope everyone understands that we do not believe that Russians are real orcs and not non-humans. By the way, Tolkien has a version which is not that much popular, that orcs are humans, not elves. It's in the 10th volume of the History of Middle-earth. And here, if you read it very attentively, the text is short, but it kind of like describes what's happening to Russian people, how they are manipulated by propaganda, and how they start losing their humanity to some point, but still they are humans. And just this morning I've been to my hairdresser, and she told that she has some relatives in Russia, and they had to stop to communicate with them because these relatives just, it's not only on our side, this dehumanization. Her relatives in Russia believe that we Ukrainians eat children. We put the meat of children into borscht. It's our national soup, very, very famous.
It's a very old accusation, that, isn't it? That's been thrown.
Yeah, it's kind of like, and we were told this on television on multiple occasions, so this is truth. I keep repeating that mass media and propaganda, it's kind of black magic. It just enchants people. And in this case, they stopped understanding the metaphor and start kind of like taking it for real. Like, because it's interesting that we're divided now. Russians calls Ukrainians elves, but elves are not good. I hope you understood from my talk that for them orcs are good, and they're belied by this bad West, who just like distort the truth, and the orcs are good and peaceful people who just want to live the way they like to live. And it's kind of like, it's very interesting, this shift from metaphorical thinking to like, I don't know how to literal understanding of what Tolkien wrote about. And I know that many Tolkien scholars are not very happy with it, but unfortunately, dear people, you can be happy or unhappy with some developments. If they happened and started happening in culture, you cannot cancel it. It will continue. And now I see how new memes are coming up with the situation in the United States. And now I read in the comment section from this like American side that they think about the United States under the Trump as a Mordor. And that's why I showed you the new meme about
metaphors can move around, can't they?
Yeah, and it's quite interesting how it shifted because the United States, Valinor, they're located actually there, but suddenly it's their self-perception, and it's always, again, it's metaphorical, and we should always remember that sometimes we need these metaphors to go through through trauma. For us, just believe me, for us, especially, I'm a Russian-speaking Ukrainian. For us, it's kind of like double traumatic experience to have people who kind of like speak the same language and who are our relatives. I have half of the family in Russia who kind of like come to kill us. And we need this protection of metaphorical thinking just to explain this crazy situation, this unbearable reality. We will drop then all this type of thinking. But at the moment, it's very important we need these metaphors and we need to apply them in such a maybe strange way from like Western point of view. I'm sorry that I have to tell that.
No, thank you, Alexandra. It's very, very powerful. Thank you so much. If I turn to Tatiana now, who's talking about poetry, and of course, poetry is all about metaphor in so many ways.
Yeah, I think so. As a scholar majoring in Baroque literature and metaphysical poetry of different periods, metaphysical poetry is based on metaphors, and the people of the 17th century believed that the reality was too complicated to approach it directly, and believed that the only correct instrument to understand the reality, the only correct optic to see the reality properly, is to find the proper metaphor. So metaphor could be an instrument of thinking, and I think this idea somehow correlates with all our discussion today. So we need metaphorical thinking to understand reality properly. And that's what fantasy is. This is how fantasy works. It offers a metaphorical optics for our complicated reality to make something clear, more clear than any other sort of literature.
Thank you. I was thinking of Pratchett again because I've been reading after many years again The Carpet People, and there's this great quotation there that myth and metaphor are there. They're just a way to explain things without needing to do too much explaining. And I was thinking, that's brilliant. That's exactly. Gana, would you like to respond as well?
Yes, thank you. So, in fact, it is really difficult to talk about metaphor right now after all the brilliant points my colleagues have already made. I just want to add that, pictures are visualized metaphors, and or if we go into details, I can explain every single detail of this picture, and but all of them, they represented complex metaphors, and yes, they are used, as Alexandra has mentioned, to work out our traumatic experience and this traumatic experience of the people. That is why the biggest amount of these pictures, they appeared during the first year of war. Right now, I can't find so many images anymore. So people have worked through this trauma, and they went to other things. But still, again, these pictures, it is why so they are even more interesting if we take into consideration them as a means of fighting a trauma.
Sure. Thank you very much. Elena, shall we come back to you? Do you feel like you've exhausted the topic?
No, we could
Never.
pick up on what Anna has just said. Yeah, in the very first days after the full-scale invasion in February 2022, it was so hard to think. It was so hard to read anything. Like many people said they could not read books, and it took them a while before they could return to actually reading longer narratives. So pictures, memes, humor, this is what got people through. That guy from Mykolaiv, Kim, he was the one when he said, orcs are coming, I need to put on a clean t-shirt now to fight them. This is what helped us enormously in those days. It was immediate. It was like immediate fix you need to take. And then when we horribly got accustomed, let's say, to it, we went back to longer narratives, but how instantly those metaphors work. And on the other hand, once again, I'm coming from the point of view of cognitive linguistics. I'm really interested in the way our mind works, and it works on metaphors because they're not that obvious, but these are the structures of our thinking. Therefore, if something goes wrong there, it's also not immediately apparent. It's a process you need to do all of the time. This is what thinking is, identifying, right, this metaphorical traps. In the context of war, there has been a huge trap, like country is a family. So Russians would say, but we are brothers. And this is such a harmful metaphor, as we've been trying to dismantle this a lot and so on. So yeah, we are in the constant process of dealing with metaphors, celebrating them, but also being aware of the dangers. And fantasy is here for us to help us do what we want to do with our mind.
Lovely, lovely. Thank you very much. We have some practical questions that I think we should address. So there was one specific one for Tatiana, and then a more general one about other translations. So Tatiana, is there any plan for hashtag 4.5.0 to be published in English, as far as you know? And then a correlation to that. Are there any Ukrainian fantasy authors that have been translated into English that our listeners, our attendees at the moment could pick up? So I'll go Tatiana first to answer that specific question, and then can you think of examples that we can give, recommendations for people for reading? Tatiana.
Yeah, to answer the specific question about this art book, no, not to my knowledge so far. I know that Ina Hunchar has some of her poems translated into English, and they could be found on social media. But as far as I know, according to the information I got from the authors, this is their first mutual collaboration. This is their first collaborative project. And as far as I understand, they're preparing the next art book together, but I don't know about anything about the possibilities of translation. But I think it's a good idea.
Absolutely, and we loved reading your translation of that.
And I have, if I may, I have very nice information because both of the authors are with us today. They're listening.
Lovely!
Yes, they're participating, and they say, Ina just wrote to me to say thank you, and thank you for the lovely presentation and a good event. So that's it.
Thank you for letting us know, and many, many thanks for your art and words, both of you. Thank you. Okay, so Ukrainian fantasy that has been translated into English. Is there any available, easily available texts you think that our attendees can pick up? I mean, obviously we've got Olena's lovely story, but any other examples? Would anybody like to have a go at that?
Fantasy, not to my knowledge, but science fiction, yes. Embroidered Worlds, a collection called The Embroidered Worlds. This is collection of the new Ukrainian science fiction. As far as it seems to me that it contains some fantasy bits, but I'm not sure. But I'm sure for the title, Embroidered Worlds. So look for it.
Embroidered Words. Thank you very much. If we can we might try to make a list after the event as well for our blog. Any other ideas? Any other suggestions? It's the same problem with my language as well. Lots of things never get translated. I don't think there's much Greek fantasy translated into English either.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to move to Andy's question here. Andy Higgins is here from the Imperial War Museum. He's asking, when you look at the types of fantasy and speculative literature that is being written in Ukraine today, as far as you know, right, as far as your interaction with creative practitioners at the moment, how do you think is the war influencing their work, or how do you think they're responding to this moment, to this, we're not at the moment of invasion anymore. We're at the moment where this has been going on for a long, long time. But, during this period, have you seen any evidence of direct engagement with the war? Who'd like to go at that? Have a go at that?
Maybe I'll start.
Sure, Evgenia, go.
Yes, we really have some specific texts written in fantasy style, which cover the current events. And for example, at our conference, which was held in January, there was a very interesting and fresh paper of a young Korean researcher describing the novel set in Kiev railway station during the very first period of the war, where people were trying to escape to save their lives. It was, you can imagine what is it, a railway station flooded with people, was terrified, with people with their children, cats, dogs, small backpacks. And here the author introduces into the plot the characters from Ukrainian mythology. In my opinion, that case is really very interesting. And so they've been doing plenty of works in this direction. And I'm not sure that any of them were translated. I'm afraid not. But maybe some of earlier papers, like books like Arenev, for example. Ladies, you don't know? Volodymyr Arenev? No?
I don't know, but this is the problem with us people on this panel. We've been studying English language.
Yeah,
of course.
Actually, yes, Pratchett, Tolkien, and
Ask me about Pratchett, anything, Tolkien, anything. But we'll
sorry.
I've already borrowed a book from the local library about Crimea, set in utopian future, right? So I will be able to say something about it once I've read it. I know that we need to do this, but we have a field of research, therefore,
Sure. Well, I'm hoping this event is just the beginning and that we'll continue the conversation anyway. So hopefully we'll come back to that.
Sure.
But even that one example that Evgenia gave us, it's really interesting, and it intersects also with Tatiana's paper and with Ganna's paper. And, you know, this idea of mythology as a resource for fantasy, but also as a resource for sort of, again, coping with trauma of you know, going back to the roots, you know, all of these ideas that we've been talking about today. So that works quite nicely. Tatiana, yes?
If I may just to proceed with what Evgenia started, yes, the Children of the Fiery Time, this is an interesting novel dealing with the very first World of War. It contains a very interesting image, metaphor of Kiev reversed. Kiev on the other side, you know, changed by war. And also it's a novel, but also I would like to mention that we've got a very interesting Ukrainian author writing fantasy for mostly for children, but also for young adult, Marina Muller. She's also an excellent poet, and she's got a very nice sequence of poems, a very nice cycle dedicated to her impressions of the very first time in Kiev at the beginning of the full-scale invasion. And she uses the Tolkien-related metaphors in that, just to describe exactly her feelings during the air attacks, and, you know, just all that dramatic experience. It's very interesting. And she says she has a poem where she addresses Tolkien directly.
Oh wow, that's amazing.
So this also
so that's fascinating as well, isn't it? And again, that touches a lot of the paper today. This dialogue with other authors, isn't it? Yes, Evgenia?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that some of our most brilliant poems were translated into English, like, and they really contain mythological images, and it was one of our plans to introduce them to you, but we changed the mind during the preparation of the panel. We may share with you the links, and you will see how the mythological imaginary works in the poetry and in translated version.
Amazing.
They were very popular in 2022.
Sure. Sure. It'll be lovely to have any more information you want to share that we can put on our blog or on our website afterwards. We can. And obviously, as I said, hopefully we will get to do this again. That's the idea anyway, and hopefully involve even more people too. There is a lovely question by Rob about escape and escapism, but I think we sort of started answering that with a metaphor, really, didn't we? Which isn't quite the same thing, but I think a lot of your points would be relevant there. I'm just very conscious that it's 7:30, and I don't want us to go over, if that's all right. So very, very briefly to just let people know that our next event at the moment on the calendar is on the 3rd of April, and it's a symposium on publishing fantasy for young readers. We're going to have Frances Harding as our keynote speaker, and those of you that are on our mailing list, you will have already heard about it. Tickets are going really fast, so don't leave it too late. But the main thing for me to do tonight is to thank our amazing speakers. Thank you so much to Yevgenia, to Tatiana, Alexandra, Gana, Olena. It's been absolutely brilliant. I feel like I've learned so much. I've got a whole new horizon of questions to think about. Thank you also to Mimi for helping me today, Tim and Andy for helping with organizing all of this. And yes, as I said, hopefully we'll get to do this again and touch base again, and hopefully at better times. Really, 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 really wishing this for everyone. Thank you all so much. And hopefully we'll see all each other in another event. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.